Guys, Nathan here from the Paramedic Preload, and today we're going to be going over the dopamine drip. Now, this is a pretty interesting one because dopamine is its own kind of beast when it comes to pressors, and with that comes its own formula. Now, dopamine has kind of fallen out of the limelight as of recent years, and a lot of people are getting away from it. But here's the thing. Depending on where you go or what your backup pressor is, you may run into dopamine. So it's very, very important that you still understand that with this drug comes its own formula, and how do we get that formula to work? So let's go over this formula really quick. We're going to put this down onto the paper for you. And then what we're going to do is we're going to work through how do we get the parts of this so we can make this formula work. Now, first of all, the biggest thing to look for is what are we solving for? Well, with most of our IV drips, as we talked about before, Epi and TXA and all those, Norepi, they have the IV drip medication administration formula, which was a whole different video podcast that I did. But with this one, this is going to be very specific. We are still looking for drops per minute. So if you guys remember, that's GTTS per minute. And that is what we're solving for. So how do we get this formula? Well, here's the parts of it. We are looking for a desired dose. Now, a desired dose for dopamine itself is going to be roughly 2 to 10 or 2 to 20 micrograms per kilogram per minute. So it looks a little complex, micrograms per kilogram per minute. Well, weight's going to play a role in this, but we'll figure that out here in a second. And also I'm going to go ahead for today, and let's just say that your protocol says 2 to 10. Now, regardless, as long as you stay within your protocol, you just plug in this number once you know what your desired dose is. And kind of the cool part about dopamine is you get to actually choose. So you have that ability to say, hey, you know what? This person's really sick. We're going to go to 10. Hey, you know what? They're hypotensive a little bit more than I want them to be. I need to get that pressure up. Maybe I'll start at 5, or I'll start at 3, or I'll start at 4, or I'll start at 2. And so you kind of get to choose a little bit. So desired dose, we're going to come up with that here shortly, and we'll work through some problems. We're going to do that times our weight in kilograms. Very important that we convert to kilograms, which is essentially dividing the weight by 2.2. So their pounds by 2.2 is going to give you their kilograms. And then what IV tubing size? So I'm going to put IV tube size here. But in reality, I'm going to put a 60 here. And the reason why, let me make that look a little bit better for you. The reason why I put a 60 here is because when we're given drips like this, medication drips, especially dopamine drips, it is going to be with a 60 drop. That is just how this works. And then the bottom of our formula that we're dividing by is concentration on hand. So the first thing that I want to do is I really want to look at this concentration on hand. And I really want to talk about how do we come up with this number? How do we get that concentration on hand? And if you guys followed along on the IV drip medication administration podcast, we went over that. But let's go ahead and hit some quick topics on this so we can make sure that we go over this and it's a little bit of a refresher for those of you guys who have seen it. So a couple quick things to just remember when we're trying to talk about concentration. When we're dealing in dopamine, when you look at the vials of dopamine, the vials of dopamine are going to come 400 milligrams is in this vial. And so you get this vial of dopamine, and inside this, and I don't know if I'll be able to actually like draw you a little vial right here. I'm not very good at drawing. So inside this vial here is 400 milligrams. Now we can choose what size bag that we want. And depending on that bag is going to depend on how our formula goes and how our concentrations are. But when we are working through this, we are going to determine our bag size. So let's say we go with a 500 cc bag. We draw the little bag. Let's put the little drip set on there, and we'll say this is 500 cc's. Now we have to come up with a concentration. Now there's two concentrations that are out there. Those concentrations can either be 800 or a concentration of 1600. And this one in particular is the AHA, American Heart Association, ACLS concentration when we talk about that. Now, once again, this is starting to lose a little bit of favor in EMS, but there's still a time and a place for it. So we still see it preached and teached out there to everyone. So 1600 with the AHA ACLS concentration. So let's go with that 1600 right now. And you'll see how we mix this. And then once we talk about how we mix this, you can see how easy it could be to actually get an 800 concentration and just do your math that way as well. It all just depends on the protocols and where you're at. So we already talked about that these come in 400 milligram vials. And one of the ways that I had talked to you guys about getting concentration is essentially switching the milligrams into micrograms, because we know we have to give dopamine in a microgram. So let's go over that really quick. So for micrograms, it takes 1,000 micrograms to equal 1 milligram. And that's important because we're going to have to do that conversion. Now, if we put if we put 400 milligrams into this 500 bag, and I was to do that math, that would be in micrograms. If you do 400 times 1,000, that's going to equal 400,000 micrograms. And I just wrote that wrong. There we go. MCGs that go into this vial itself. Well, I'm going to cross through that 400 milligrams because we need to put in a micrograms. So if you do 400,000 and we divide that by 500, that's going to give us our concentration. Now, the problem that you're going to notice is that that only gives you a number of 800. So that's a concentration of 800. Well, we don't want 800. We want 1600. So what do? We need to put in another vial. So what we're going to do is we are going to put in 2 times 400 milligram vials. And that is going to equal 800 milligrams total. And so what is that in micrograms? Well, in micrograms, that is going to be 800 times 1,000. So 800, and you times that by 1,000, gives you 800,000. So we are putting in 800,000 micrograms into that 500 cc bag. And if we put that into our math formula, 800,000, that is going to give us a number of 1,600. And what are we shooting for? I am shooting for a concentration of 1,600. So the way that we do it is, how many parts of this drug in micrograms am I putting into my 500 bag? I'm putting 800,000 micrograms into my 500 bag. Now, if you're really good with decimals, you may just divide 800 by 500 and move your decimal place to the thousandth. For a lot of people, it's just easier to think right off the bat, make that conversion, 800,000. We put 800,000 into that 500 bag, and that is what gives us this concentration of 1,600. So now that we have our concentration, let's get into the rest of that formula, and then let's just put it together really quick and let's see how that works. All right, so here's our formula again. And what I have done is I have left a little bit of room at the bottom, and I know it might look a little wonky here, but that's so we can write this in. So we already talked about our desired dose is going to be, per our protocol, somewhere between 2 and 10 micrograms per kilogram per minute, which is why that we had to, with dopamine, say, okay, we got to convert this into micrograms, divide that by the amount of the bag that we put it in. And if you remember, we put this into a 500 cc bag. So let's put this in desired dose. Now I'm just going to grab a random number really quick. I haven't worked this out. I'm going to work it out with you as we go. But let's say that our desired dose, as we have a fairly sick patient, let's go with 8 micrograms per kilogram per minute. So our desired dose is 8 mcgs. 8 mcgs. Let's just put that in there. 8 micrograms per kilogram per minute. We are going to times that by our weight in kilograms. Let's go for a random weight. Let's say that this weight in kilograms comes out to 122 kilos. And then we are going to times that by our IV tubing size. And I talked about this earlier. When you're given dopamine, it's awesome because it's always a 60 drop tube. So you just put a big old 60 there. And then what was our concentration on hand? Well, if you remember, we put 800,000 into that 500 bag, which told us that we had a 1600 concentration, which is what we were shooting for in ACLS concentration. So let's plug those numbers together really quick. And that concentration on hand just tells you that at essentially giving 60 drops or 1 cc, you give 1600 micrograms. And I know that you're like, oh man, I'm only shooting for 8. But remember, we're shooting for 8 per kilogram per minute, which is why it's so important to kind of understand those concentrations on here. So let's plug these numbers in. Let's start at the top there. We're going to do 8 times 122, which is our kilograms, times 60, which is our drop set, which gives me 58,560. And we are going to divide that by our concentration, which is 1600. And when we do that, that's going to give us 36.6 GTTS a minute, because that's what we were solving for. And so what that says is, with that, if I give 36.6 drops per minute, then what I will get is I will get my desired dose of 8 mcgs per kilogram per minute. And so that patient will be getting the concentration that they need per kilograms, which is 122 per minute that they have. And so at 36.6 drops a minute, that is how we are able to give them this concentration. Now, I know this seems kind of daunting. This seems crazy. It seems like a pretty outlandish formula, and there's a lot going on with this. So let's plug in some more numbers and let's see what else we can kind of get out of this for you. So on this next one, we are going to use the same concentration. We are going to use our 1600, which is that 800,000 micrograms into a 500 cc bag. So it's 2 vials of dopamine. If you remember, we did that conversion there. So that's going to be our concentration. So let's put that down there. Let's go 1600 down here. So we already know our concentration. So next up is going to be our desired dose. Well, we talked about it earlier, 2 to 10, right, is going to be the desired mics per kilogram per minute is usual desired dose. Let's just shoot for, let's go with 4. Let's go for 4 as our desired dose, 4 mcgs. Now, let's say that their weight is actually in pounds. They don't know kilograms, and we haven't converted yet. And so the mom tells you, or the dad tells you, or somebody, a bystander on scene, tells you that the weight of this patient is about 120 pounds. So this is weight-based. This is per kilogram, so we can't just put 120 up there. We have to convert that. So as we had talked about it before, how do we convert this? We have to essentially divide 120 pounds by 2.2. And when you put that into a calculator at 120 and you hit divide by 2.2, it is going to give you 54.54. Now, significance in real world, I'm probably just going to use 54. Significance for MedMath, if you're actually in a paramedic program or an EMS program somewhere, always use rounded to what they tell you. So they may say just put 54, but I always try to put at least the first 2 there. So 54.54. And then we said IV tubing size, which is going to be 60, and it's always 60. So now we've easily converted into kilograms. We've been able to put that in. And now if you look, we have our new formula up here, and that's 4 times 54.54. So 4 times 54.54. And then we are going to times that by 60, which is going to give us, so 13,089.6, and we're going to divide that by 1600. So if we take that 13,089.6, and we divide that by our concentration, 1600, that tells us that is going to equal 8.18. Now, clinically, what are we going to do? We're going to probably shoot for 8. We may not be able to fully shoot for 8. Depends on if we have a pump or a dial of flow, or if we're trying to count it. But 8.18 drops per minute. So with this patient who weighs 54 kilograms, if we want to give 4 micrograms per kilogram per minute, it is going to take 8.18 drops per minute. So it really, once you have all the answers and you know, or all the numbers and you know where to get them, it opens this formula wide open and you're able to do the different math problems really, really fast. Now let's look at the other concentration real quick, which you don't see a lot, but I just want to show you how that number is just going to change a little bit. And so let's talk about how we're going to change this concentration. We'll use the exact same patient, the exact same dose, but let's just change the concentration real quick. And so let's kind of go over that and how we're going to get there. So let's say with this patient, you reach into your bag and you don't have 2 vials. We forgot to restock, we're running low, there's a back order, but you know what you do have? You have 1 vial of 400 milligrams. So we know we need to give it, once again, in micrograms. So what do? Essentially, we do 400, and we do that 400 times 1,000, which is going to equal 400,000 micrograms. So we do 400,000 micrograms into here. And when you do 400,000 divided by 500, so really simple, 400 divided by 500, you can punch in your calculator. You just put 4 zeros, the 400,000, hit your divide sign, 500, and that is going to equal 800. So that concentration is going to give you 800. Now, here's the cool part. Even with that concentration, we can still get the dose that we need because our concentration now, we said, is going to be 800. Well, let's put this into that formula. And so let's do our math up here really quick. And we do that 4 micrograms as our desired dose per kilogram per minute times our kilograms, 54.54. And then we are going to times that by our drop set, which is 60. And so that gives us 13,089.6. We'll keep that going. We're going to divide that by our concentration of 800. And what that tells us is we need 16.362 drops per minute. And if we can get 16.362 drops per minute in our 60 set, we will give this patient 4 micrograms per kilogram per minute, and they will get the desired dose they're looking for. Now, if you saw that, what this really was is just doubling the dose because the concentration is half that amount. The original concentration was 1600. This concentration is 800. But it just shows that no matter what we have, how can we make this work? And this is how we can do this. Now, I'm going to show you one more because you may not have a 500 bag. So let's change this up a little bit. I'm going to give you a new problem that we can work through, but I'm going to give you a different size bag as well. So here we are. We are running our call. We realize this patient needs dopamine, and you reach in and guess what you're fresh out of? You're fresh out of 500 bags. So all you can find is a 250 bag, and you think, man, this is way too small for what I need right now. But we're going to make this work. So we've got a 250 cc bag. We'll make it a little bit smaller than the last one. We'll still put our drip set on there. We're going to put 250 in the box. Oops, I just deleted everything, didn't I? There we go, 250 cc's in the box. So that is how much we have inside our bag. Now you reach in and you have your vial of dopamine and you're like, man, I got to figure out my concentration. So we know that we can put in 1 vial, we can put in 2 vials, we have to figure out what is that concentration on hand for that bottom that's down here. So when we're looking for that concentration, well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to start off by saying, okay, well, what happens if I put 400 milligrams in here? So I take that 400 milligrams and I want to know what it is in micrograms. So I do 400 milligrams and we're going to times that by that 1,000. So 400 times 1,000, that is 400,000 if you put that into a calculator. So we have how many micrograms going into this bag? Well, total I have 400,000 micrograms going into this bag right here. So what I want you to do is quickly put 400,000 on your calculator and divide that by 250. And you're maybe shocked, you may not be shocked, you're going to come up with a concentration of 1,600. Now, let's say with this patient, you want to give, we said 2 to 10 earlier. So let's just say you want to give a whole 10. You want to go 2 to 10 micrograms per kilogram per minute. And you want to give a whole 10 micrograms per kilogram per minute. So let's put that desired dose as 10 mcgs. Kilograms. I'm just going to throw a random kilogram at you, to be honest, because we can just throw numbers at this. Let's say 72. 72 kilograms times our drop set, which is a 60 drop. It should always be a 60 drop for dopamine. So now as we do that math, so we're going to do that 10 times 72. That should give you 720. And then we times that by 60. That's going to give you 43,200. We're going to divide that by 1,600. And what is that going to equal? That is going to equal 27. So 27, we were solving for drops per minute. So 27 drops per minute gets me a desired dose of 10 micrograms per kilogram per minute, which matches with our IV tubing there. And that's a 1,600 concentration. So we still met our ACLS concentration with a completely different size bag. And so what's really cool about that is this can be done with one vial into a 250 bag, or we can do 4 vials into 1,000 or 2 vials into a 500. There's multiple ways that we can get this done. And so it depends on our bag size that we use. But in the end, what do we get? We get this 27 drops per minute, which tells us that that is what the patient needs. 27 drops per minute is going to get this patient 10 micrograms per kilogram per minute. And that is the dopamine formula. So with that desired dose times our weight in kilograms times our IV tubing size over that concentration that we have, and we find that by dividing how much in micrograms we are putting into our saline bag. And so it's really just those micrograms divided by the saline size 250, and that is what gives us that 1,600. So I encourage you to kind of play with this. Look up a dopamine vial, look up a dopamine drip pitcher so that you can see how it comes pre-mixed. Come up with some different math problems and throw these in. And honestly, one of the greatest resources that we have now is AI. You can ask it to give you a paramedic level dopamine drip calculation problem and have it withhold the answer. Tell it to withhold it, and then you work this all out. Give it the answer and see if you got that correct. If you have any questions, throw them in the comments. I thank you for joining us. I'm hoping that these math equations help you guys out in working through this, especially this dopamine formula, because it scares so many people, but yet it can be so simple as long as you know how to get those numbers. So thank you for joining us and have a great day.